The Brave Space podcast is devoted to the meeting of body and spirit. In a culture of shared respect and love for the life force that moves through us, we move, feel, dance, breathe, touch, and sing in somatic ecstatic prayer. Brave Space is the place of belonging, safe enough to take the risk of being vulnerable. Hello and welcome to the Brave Space podcast. I am your host, Matthew Nelson. Today, we're going to be talking about power, domination, and submission, and then my personal favorite, co-creation, which to me is what comes through contact improvisation dancing. These also are subjects that come up a lot in sexuality, domination and submission, and how we're engaged in power in relationship is really modeled by the sexual. Mark Gaffney talks about how the sexual models the erotic, and that the erotic is really just our life force. All that's happening happens through this field of the erotic if we allow it to be expanded to that. So the sexual models how we do that. So today I have on the podcast two incredible guests, both of whom are dancers. Susan Coates, who is a faculty for Somatica Institute.
I am Susan Coates. I am a sex and relationship and intimacy coach here in Denver, Colorado. One of my biggest enjoyments is contact improvisation, which is shared way through space between two or more bodies in motion. It's very much something that keeps me enlivened.
And Claire Rumore, who is also a sex and relationship coach. She's based in California, and she is core faculty for Shakti Shiva Academy.
What I'm doing here is exploring the intersections of sexuality and spirituality. I love being with people in the thick, uncomfortable, difficult, taboo areas of life.
So both of them are leaders in conscious, heart-driven sexuality, and what they bring to this understanding of power, of dominance and submission and co-creation. I think these women both just do a fantastic job of educating us. They'll take us far. So here we go. Welcome to both of you. I'm wondering if we could start by speaking to dominance and submission. I always avoided the question for many years. I avoided the question of dominance and submission because I went, hey, I like co-creation. And to me, contact improv really has shown me this sense of we're both leading and we're both following at essentially most times. That there's a sense that there's a listening together to what's coming next, what's being given here, and an engagement with that, a moving into that listening. And when I teach contact, a classic exercise would be one person leads and then the other person leads. And then we go back and forth. And at some point we kind of take that away. We say, hey, now there's no leader, figure it out, right? And that vibration, that perspective of there's no leader, figure it out, is sort of my worldview, which means in the shadows, there's certainly stuff going on in me that is not as co-created, right? Because my personality loves to say, this is at the forefront, this is what's true. So I'm aware there are probably pieces of me that have unconscious patterning that is not that. And one of the reasons why I'm coming with this question, tell me about dominance and submission, is because it's probably in my shadow. It's probably something I'm not as aware of because I have such this sense of like, I love co-creation. And I'm aware of more than I'm claiming to be aware of, but this is also still true of me. So that's where the question's coming from.
I mean, there's so much I could say. I had some dances yesterday at my local Boulder contact improvisation lab that I co-founded 20 plus years ago. And I noticed that I often have dances where I feel like there's this implied sense of somebody that following is listening. And leading is saying, leading is positing, leading is doing. But I think that some of my most boring dances have been that, where like the follower, the submitter is the person who's flattening who they are to accommodate what the other person is dictating. And to me, that's pretty classic power dynamics in leadership, historically, I would say, in the United States, at least, in patriarchal culture, for sure. And I see a lot of just enmeshment happen there. When I say enmeshment, I mean like kind of losing the self into the leader. And I just don't find those dances when I have those kinds of dances where I'm bringing some kind of strong expression and the other person kind of flattens themselves. I get really bored because I'm actually not interested in dominance by being the only one saying and doing, and the other person just flattening themselves to accommodate me. So the way I see dominance and submission is really it's about power and co-attunement at its best. So it's about an exchange of power. It's about coming into consensual practice, whether verbally or non-verbally, about where power lies, where power is being offered, where power is being shared, and co-attunement. And there are varying degrees of how much power is going to be given over, right, in a dominance submission kind of dynamic. In some, it's like all the power is given over. A person could be completely unable to even act physically, right? If they're held down, but there can be varying degrees of power exchange. And that's what I'll just say off the bat. I mean, I know we're going to get into quite a bit more content because I just said a lot.
Claire, do you want to respond to that?
Yeah, I love the co-attunement piece. And I really feel at a high level, that's what's possible in a conscious activation or demonstration of domination and submission. We certainly have this power over, power under, unconscious, even abuse of power that can happen in domination and submission. And the dance of domination and submission is one of the key polarities in life we can look at, polarities being opposites that are undeniably and infinitely attracted to each other, creating a wholeness of movement that they are opposites, though they complement each other, meaning can't have one without the other. So you can't have a dominant stance without a submissive stance in that same field. And so domination and submission look different, like in the context of a BDSM dungeon space, of a kink play space. Then domination and submission are playing out in these more archetypal roles, ideally that are negotiated and a scene ensues and people are exploring different erotic inclinations in that context. But then we have domination and submission on the dance floor, and that's an entirely different experience, or domination and submission in the workplace. And then we need to bring considerably more mindfulness to those places when the power is being played with. And I see domination and submission. It was recently reflected to me in a dance class I was in, domination being leadership and submission being devotion. And so when we're in that place of devotion, there's a deep listening and a deep surrendering over to the other. But the dominant needs to inspire that and hold that with such care and compassion and consideration. So in that way, it's this beautiful, beautiful relationship that becomes possible. And I really love this analogy of leadership and devotion coming together, whether it's devotion to a greater cause, devotion to the beauty of self-expression on the dance floor. That co-attunement is essential. Yeah, Susan, I really think you nailed that. You hit that, the hammer on the head, the nail on the head. Yeah, with that one.
The devotion.
Precise tuning in. Mm-hmm.
The devotion piece I am really taken by, because it has such a broad reach of like, yeah, what are we devoted to in this world? Like, I know you two both to be people with incredible devotion, and you're both creators, and I am as well. Like, all three of us have something that we want to further and care about deeply and show up in devotion to that. I'm curious how that manifests in this play of dominance and submission as you're speaking to it, of the devotion, if you can go a little deeper into the devotion.
Yeah. So the other night I was in a class, I was telling you about this event, Matthew. It's an event here in the Bay Area called Everything, Everywhere, All at Dance. And the intention of this event is to bring the worlds of contact, improv, and fusion partner dancing together to play off of each other and see what those worlds could learn from each other. And then there's also exploration of a larger container holding erotic energy in a very mindful way, in a larger container of gender neutral language, gender neutral pronouns, and creating an ethos of shared community that goes a step beyond what other dance communities have currently been creating. So there's a very experimental space. And the class for that evening was led by an amazing teacher here in the larger Bay Area and known throughout the country in the United States. Their name is Zahaba Gris, or Z. And Embody More Love is their work. And so what Z, who blends dance and kink and emotional intelligence and power systems, was teaching through the class this past week, was how is it when we step into the role of the dominant and we're coming from a place of leadership, and I love that word, assertiveness. So the dominant, the leader in the dance, is asserting the movement and what they want to invite the submissive into. And then the submissive in this role play or in this practice is there tapping into what is their devotion? What does that feel like in their body? Just like the dominant was invited to feel into, what does leadership feel like in your body? Where does it show up in your body? And then once each of those partners got in touch with the feeling, then they turned towards each other and created, it wasn't even a dance like contact improv or fusion or ecstatic would produce a dance. It was more of the dominant, the leader, making movement happen after consulting with the submissive. Okay, don't touch this part has an injury, checking in with consent. But once that was established, what do I as the leader want to have happen in this moment? And then would move the submissive, and then the submissive would give their self over in this act of devotion to the shared experience, to the dominant, to the moment at large, to the greater good of humanity, however we want to frame it. There was a place of devotion. And the question was also asked, what do you feel devoted to in your life? So once the submissives got to identify that fueled the relational field and the movement also. So this devotion is coming from a surrender to self, a surrender to other, a surrender to something greater, something larger, a surrender to the moment, and also from a somatic felt knowing of that, this pouring into the shared space.
Gotcha.
Yeah. So those are my words for it today. Hope that helps.
Yeah. Thank you.
Flesh out this vision.
Might be Brian O'Connell. Is that
Correct.
Brian
B. O'Connell.
And I've met, Zahava.
Fantastic community organizers and dancers who are exploring these exact themes that we're talking about today.
There is this piece that came up for me in listening where I'm like, if someone's fully devoted to me leading the space, between leading the dance between us, asserting my piece, I have a fear at least come up, or a projection that I'm going to end up in exactly the place that Susan named, of like, oh, well, that's going to be a boring dance because I'm not going to get the feedback I need or the pushback that might give me something inspirational. I'm curious, Susan, am I speaking to what you're talking about there?
I mean, I think a lot of times people in dominant roles will need a certain amount of check-in with someone in a submissive role. And that is more than okay. It's not this like, well, if you're going to be a real dominant, you should get all the information up front, attune perfectly up front, and then you should just take it and run with it, which is, I think, often dominant culture's way of saying that's being a good leader. You shouldn't have to get help, which is really just attunement and checking things out with someone to see if you're attuning in a way that is really actually real on the other end. I think a lot of times in this kind of leadership culture that we're stewed in is it's seen as a weakness, but I don't think that's weak at all. I think that's actually well attuned. So attuning to self, hey, I actually need to check in with quite a lot of frequency with someone who is in a subordinate role, because I really do want to make sure I'm attuning in a way that has us both actually here together, still in connection and not disconnected.
What are the qualities of attunement? Like, if we're going to sit with that word for a minute, can we break it down a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, when I think of attunement, I think of like coming inside our own bodies, however we do that. So there's an amount of embodiment involved. I say embodiment, coming into oneself, being able to occupy this body we're in, this experience we're having. We can do that in a lot of ways, through breathing, through visualization, through taking space, writing, whatever ways we do that. So attuning to self is really taking that time and that space to listen, what's happening for me. And then attuning to other is, okay, what do I notice about this other person while they're sitting with me? What do I notice comes up in me when I'm sitting with them, or as I'm doing this? And what do I want to check out about what I notice? And actually finding out if that's actually real on the other end.
So like the story that I've got going in my head about what's true, actually reflecting that back, that could be a verbal way of attuning. Checking out.
It could be. And then over time, if you get really good at it, and good, I mean, like skilled, like you can skillfully attune to a person. No matter how skillful I am at attunement, there are people I have a really hard time attuning to, and I actually really have to check things out quite a bit. So it might vary from person to person how much, you need to verbalize attunement. With some people at a certain point, you can kind of start to take off, where you're both on the same channel, and you found it and you've checked it out, and you found, oh, yep, we're there. Yeah. And then you can actually take off with it without a whole lot of checking in.
Yeah. Yeah. The verbal can get in the way sometimes of that, actually, which is why I love dance so much.
Well, because the checking in sometimes stops what's actually happening to check it out. So then it's already changing as you're checking it out.
Yes.
Yeah. And sometimes some people don't want to be checked in with a whole lot. How many of us have had, experiences sensually, sexually, in friendship? Like, I don't know, what do you want to do? How do you feel about this? How's this feeling now? Like there are moments when it can be a lot or too much.
Yeah. That almost feels to me like the liability of this co-creative perspective is when it's not working, or if there's not enough dominance in a co-creation, then it just becomes a lot of like checking in about attunement. Hey, are you good with this? Maybe, how are you with it? Like it gets into that protective space, but it's like protecting other. It's not even protecting self. It's like somehow that's maybe enmeshed.
Enmeshed.
That's the enmeshment story, right? As if we can't find any dominance and we're just constantly kind of bowing to each other without stepping into ourselves.
Yeah, it feels that domination and submission, or rather co-creation, without clearly defined relationships to domination and submission, can hold a shadow. And that shadow is the over caretaking of each other or of the other, where we're disregarding or just not even attuning to our own desires. What do I want in this moment? Because we're afraid of that desire energy and that it might steamroll someone else, or they might feel comfortable in the presence of my strong desire, even though I'm perhaps in the creator, actually more in the creator role, even within the co-creation. And in the larger BDSM realm, where domination and submission is a key core theme, especially if one is going to explore these realms professionally, one spends time as a submissive, exploring submission first, and then explores domination. and then can understand the experience of both roles and can even move between them if called upon, but can hold one of them and understand the experience of the other when someone else is in that role. And there's a beautiful need, really, of each person getting clear on what their relationship to power is, first of all, what their relationship to wielding the power and submitting the power is. It's also a known thing in the realm of kink that even though the dominant is appearing to hold the power, is directing the scene, is making things happen, is doing things to the submissive, it's actually the submissive that's holding all the power, because at any moment, the submissive can call the scene, can say red, and everything ends, no matter what the dominant has been doing in the active role. The submissive holds all the power and can pull the plug at any moment. And so that's a key piece to recognize. There's such a paradox when it comes to power. And that's why the shadow of the submissive is coming from this place of helplessness. And I don't have power. I don't have choice. And in a more extreme version, I'm a victim here because the submissive isn't in relationship to their relationship with power, recognizing they do have a choice. And they have chosen to, at this time, at this moment, submit and surrender and devote to what's happening, but not in a way that disregards self or abandons self. So it's a very nuanced interplay. And this is extremely important in the dance world, on the dance floor, that dances do flatten where the we space and its components are ignored. And so I'm not sure if either of you are familiar with the concept of the we space, but what the we space is about is this notion of attuning to self, attuning to other, and attuning to the third, which is the relationship, and then holding each of those three relationships simultaneously, tuning into the quality. What's my relationship, the quality of the relationship with myself? Am I tracking me? What about with you? Am I tracking you? Am I over tracking you or under tracking you? And then are we tracking ourselves? How is our we doing in this dance, in this dynamic, in this scene, in this relationship? And so tracking all three can help thwart the flatlining, the boring. It keeps that dynamism going when we're honoring that multidimensional relational field that power is really asking us for.
So articulate in that. Thank you, Claire. I'm thinking of the ways that so commonly collapses for, new dancers coming to contact, particularly. There can be that sense of self-criticism that comes in, like, I'm not doing it well enough, which is sort of an obsession with the me space in reflection of the you space, with almost no attunement to the we space, because the self-criticism shuts down the existence of the we space. There's not space for it if I'm busy thinking I'm not doing it right. So then there has to be that willingness to have that voice there and put it aside. Be like, in order to attune to you and us, I actually have to put aside the part of me that thinks I'm not good enough. Hold it at bay.
Absolutely.
How does that play out in partner dance? I don't have a lot of experience with partner dance. I went to one fusion dance with you. That's my experience of fusion dance. How do these
I think
work there?
Yeah, how they play out. And I have very little experience with contact improv. And it's really fascinating because inside contact improv, what has thrown my system off, even though I sit on the sidelines in awe of the dancers, what has thrown my system off is not knowing what we're doing here. Like, who's leading, what's happening. And I think, Matthew, that's what you love about it. It's so co-creative and it's
Yes.
so fluid and everything everywhere all at once. It's all happening here. Whereas in partner dancing, but the beauty is, for me anyway, that there are clear roles. And it's agreed upon in the first 3 seconds. Would you like to lead, follow, or switch? There's that conversation at the beginning of each dance. I'm a follow, which for me is very exciting space to occupy because in my lived life, my everyday life, I work for myself. I'm a leader in various organizations. I am a firstborn child, so I'm automatically inclined to leadership and high responsibility. I, just have all this nature in me to lead, to be the one who's wielding more power, taking more control. So to have the opportunity to surrender that is so nourishing to me. And still, it's not that I'm just being done to or directed or I'm somebody's puppet when it comes to partner dancing. What I've found is that it's very much a co-created conversation, even though there's one person who is putting the input in first, like, here's an invitation, let's do this thing. And as the follow, just like with the submissive, I actually hold a lot of power because I can disagree. I can say, nope, I don't want to do that movement. I want us to do this thing. And that could be because I misread what the lead is indicating, or it could be that, nope, I just don't want to do that. I want to do this other thing. So the lead has to follow and attune to their follow and be tracking and can't, arm wrestle them. No, we're going this way. It's very much, okay, I will yield to you and we'll do this piece and then I'll invite something else. And so it's a conversation through dance steps. And one of my personal ethos around partner dancing is, at one level, it's my lead's responsibility to make me look good. That they're doing steps that, they're here to make me look good. However, as the follow, it is also my responsibility to make my lead look good. And what I mean by that is that we're bringing our best to the dance. We are attuning to each other. We're celebrating and supporting each other. Like, oh, that was a great move you just did. Or, oops, so sorry, I misread your cue. Thanks for trying that. Let's try it again. This sort of collaborative, co-supportive, very willing, dynamic space. So we're there in support. Like, both of us are setting each other up to win, even though one technically is wielding more of the power because they're initiating a movement first. So it's a very nuanced thing, this domination, submission, and power and control inside of a partnered dynamic on the dance floor, because it's unspoken. It's so subtle. And however, for me, I really like that there are these defined roles. And the cool thing about fusion, and you might have experienced this, Matthew, on the dance floor, and Susan, maybe you know about fusion, is that you can start in one role and then you can switch later on. So it's not a fixed thing where whoever starts as the lead is always the lead, or someone who identifies as masculine is going to be the lead because that's how the gender roles are. It's nothing like that. It's incredibly fluid and collaborative in terms of a partner dance. Fusion is extremely unique in that way.
It's so funny listening. I love the empowerment that I feel in some of the new, just the new eras of partner dance. Because when I first started partner dancing, like, I was a professional dancer. I was in a company. I had my own company. But get me on a partner dance floor and it was as if my limbs just stopped working. I couldn't handle that amount of unfreedom in the power dynamics. And so I'm definitely starting to warm up now that I see, like, even hearing you speak about, well, you can switch back and forth. And I'm just like, yay. It makes me,
Exactly.
yeah, it draws me in a lot more, but it's really wonderful hearing you speak about it.
Yeah, I'm seeing how these worlds that seem so different, like contact improv seems like its own universe of dance, so different than partner dancing in general. And yet we're starting to see that they're turning towards each other and getting to learn from each other. Just like when I was in the Tantra, am in the Tantra world and have been for a long, long time. And when I was moving towards BDSM, and there was a bit of pushback from those in the more kink BDSM professional realm that, oh, these Tantra people, it's so different than what we do. It's this and that. It's just, there is no parallel. There's no overlap. And now these two worlds are starting to turn towards each other and learn so much from each other. Like, there's a dark Tantra that's emerged, that it's exploring the shadow and the kinky elements. And then there's more of a light BDSM that's coming in with more heart-centeredness and more ceremony, and like Tantra brings. So it's neat how these seemingly two sides of the polarity that are opposites are now starting to complement each other and integrate, really merging more.
And it seems worthy to take a moment for people who may be here who aren't familiar with any of these worlds so much to speak to like the Tantra world. I'm going to try to see if I can nail this in a very general way, and please feel free to disagree. I would say the Tantra world is this sense of coming from love and prioritizing connection, and this ability to create that shared we space through conscious connection. And then the BDSM world is more looking at intentional power dynamics that may get really edgy and not necessarily be pleasant in the moment. So we're not necessarily just like leaning straight into the love pleasure space. It actually could be that we're going to explore pain and discomfort and like go to the edges of what we can possibly allow. Am I hitting that with some descriptive clarity? Does that feel true?
You are. I feel that you are. And I don't want people to get confused and think that kink or BDSM doesn't have a heart-centered, connection-focused basis. That's very much present too, especially more and more these days. I think the element I would shift or add to the Tantra piece, especially with Neo-Tantra, which is what a lot of people are familiar with, or maybe the mainstream is more familiar with, is this Tantra seeks to see the self and the other as an expression of the divine and connecting from that place of recognizing the divine in each other, hence the heart-centeredness, coming from that connection with divine. And then, you know, there's different degrees of Tantra, white Tantra, which is very divine, heart-focused, pink Tantra, which is starting to bring in a little more sensuality, and then red Tantra, which would be more the Kama Sutra, or what I like to tease and call like the bedroom acrobatics, and that focus on really intense sexuality. And so those are, you know, incredibly brief and limited definition of Tantra. Tantra is so much more than any and all of that. But I think the mainstream pieces of Tantra, those are the elements reflected more.
I guess I have this sense, like I think of contact improvisation as a tantric dance. Like that's part of the approach. And there's people who really ask that any sense of eroticism be taken out of it, which I usually kind of take as, well, that's impossible. It's the life force. How could it be taken out? Exactly. But I'm also tending to go towards that it's not the red, you know, it's not like we have to be grinding on each other. We may just be barely touching, but there's that feeling, the connection of that is the life force and its flow and its longing and play, which brings me back to co-creation, this sense of like, if we're both leaning into this next moment, one of us may get the impulse first of what comes next, which is where I find us right now. One of us may get the impulse for what comes next.
I'm having an impulse to share another frame from the Everything Everywhere All at Dance event. What's being experimented with there speaks to something you're pointing out, Matthew, that different people have different desires. Some people want a dance floor that's free of erotic energy. Other people feel like that is what fuels my dance. It's my life force. I can't extract it from what I bring to the dance floor. And everyone's entitled to their desires and preferences. Absolutely. And it can be hard to overlap those without, you know, extensive conversation and consent and communication of preferences, all that. Well, one thing that's being experimented with at Everything Everywhere All at Dance is 2 zones on the dance floor that are demarcated with just a rope laying on the floor. So it makes, you know, like 2 separate, clearly defined zones. The zone that's encircled with a black rope, when someone steps into that zone, they are communicating, they're signaling to others, I don't want to be approached. I don't want any erotic energy, and I actually don't want to be voyeured. I don't want anyone like watching my dance. I want to be in my own experience in my dance when I'm in this space. So anyone who steps into that space is having and wanting that experience. And then the rest of the dance floor, the rest of the participants knowing that that's what that space is designated for, honors it and honors those people and their desires. Then the other circled space is a white rope. So when someone steps into that particular zone, they are signaling that they welcome being approached. They welcome erotic energy. They welcome a saucy, sultry, sexy dance, that they're open to that within whatever their boundaries and preferences are. And so that can be negotiated or spoken about even during the dance. The dynamic can be asked to be changed. However, when going into that zone, people are signaling, bring it, and then we'll figure it out from there. But we're both on the same page that we want saucy, erotic energy to play with. And then the rest of the dance floor is playful. It's for practicing what was taught in the classes. It's for experimenting with inviting people to dance, possibly receiving a yes, maybe receiving a no, playing off each other. Are we doing more contact improv? Are we doing more partnery stuff? And just playing. And I love that finally these spaces are being designated and experimented with. It's not foolproof. It's not perfect, but it is a first go at creating space for these different desires that people have.
Mm-hmm. So as we're navigating all this, and Susan, I'm curious maybe to throw this question your way of like, when we're talking about power, what do we mean? I heard you speaking about freedom. Like that in a confined in a dance that has form, you're like, I want more freedom. I feel stuck here. And I resonate with that. That's my experience when I try to do partner dance, because I'm not an expert at it. I haven't learned the steps. They're not just in my body. And there's something there coming up about power as the ability to be with what is, which is different than power as the ability to shift a situation to the way that I like it. So those are some of the things coming up for me. And that's why I ask, what the heck is power?
Yeah, I think about like freedom and restriction, because when we're talking about power, for example, I'll just speak to a community I'm in of dancers. And to the extent that there's the ability to feel safe enough for a larger amount of people, like maybe the largest amount of people possible, maybe everyone. I think we also have to look at that. How many people are we actually willing to be house safe for? That's going to dictate how much freedom and how much restriction there is. And so in communities where there are repeated offenders, for example, people who don't actually know how to hold their erotic energy in ways that allow other people to feel safe. But also on the other end of that, people who have experienced a lot of trauma and don't know how to actually be skillful in their sovereign bodies in certain ways. They're somewhat feeling hijacked and they don't have that empowerment. We see a lot of restrictions start to get put into place. And people can get pretty upset about that, me included, because I think for some of us who are really skillful at what we do with our erotic energy and our inner erotic power, and we're very skillful at, when I say skillful, I mean, we're good at empowering the people around us. We're good at not hurting other people, right? With what's happening in our own bodies. We take a hit because we don't have the freedom that actually we could otherwise utilize to have really amazing experiences in community spaces. So I think about power and then restriction and freedom, almost like as like, I don't even know where those three land. There's some kind of triangle there,
Yeah.
The power leaders in a community event get to have to dominate. How much is that not attuning to us as community members? How much is that overpowering and restricting in ways that actually restrict our sovereign existence? As I sometimes experience in certain spaces where it's like, yeah, if you feel any attraction in your dance, stop how you feel. If I'm told that, I actually don't feel like I get to be a sovereign being in a community space. And I understand that that's being spoken. That's that restriction is put in place because there are people who are utilizing their power in ways that are conscious.
Thanks for speaking to this.
So I'm kind of going into my own. I have some of my own personal agenda around this.
It's fun to hear your agenda. I'm actually enjoying that.
Yeah, no, I definitely, there are things I like to say, and because I think that a lot of this is the unspoken stuff around power as well, because right now trauma is a really big hot button word. Well, everything for the sake of trauma. And it's like, well, no, not exactly. Because if I'm working with people around their sexuality and their sexual connection, but trauma is going to trump everything, then those two people are never going to have sex.
Right.
If I say, well, okay, let's work with your trauma, because we can't just end your trauma. Trauma's going to be here. And how can we work with trauma in ways that help empower people to be in their sovereignty, And I think that's the other side of it. Instead of just saying, well, we're just not going to allow any of that erotic energy into the space.
I'm back to the sense of the we space and the way that, like, if in this kind of situation where trauma is given all the power, right? The trauma response is given the power, is given the ability to dictate what's happening, then on the one hand, it's honoring a piece of what is, but if we're over focused on the kind of failure point, if you will, I may regret saying failure point, but it's the truth of what's there for me, where the system's breaking down. And instead of going for the joy, the thing we're trying to get to, the place where we can co-create, is what I'm going to call that, right? The space where our various impulses to create meet in devotion, right? That's the co-creative point. If that is able to lead, we might just be able to break right through the trauma, the place where the stuckness is, the place where there's a stumbling point. It's like maybe we can just jump at some point, but it's a risky space. And so that's why we can only talk about what's safe enough. That's why this whole podcast is called Brave Space, because there is a leap of faith there that isn't always going to go right. It's inherently risky. But otherwise, we hit the wall of the repeated pattern we're stuck in, the trauma, the piece that's not moving. It's like, a little bit ago when there was a quiet moment when I was like, I don't know what comes next in our conversation, just like contact improv. And if I were traumatized around that, I could have gotten stuck there. But instead, it's like, I wonder who's going to say the next thing. This is uncomfortable. And I love it.
I mean, even the assumption of what the we space is supposed to be, I actually feel like that prevents a lot of people who otherwise would feel very unsafe coming into connection. Because what does it even mean to come into connection to the we space, right? I had a dance yesterday that just my exact favorite kind of dance, where I was in my complete coexistence with my partner, meaning I was doing exactly what I wanted to do, expressing and as fully as I could express, and abandoning all concern for the other person, not being careless about them, but I was a neglected kid. I didn't get attunement as a kid. I need a lot of independent space to even feel free enough to feel like that I can stay in connection, and that feels enlivening to me. And so when we blow the lid off the roof of the shoulds of how you should connect when you're in we space, I think is a big, big layer that we have to really peel off a lot of shame around. Because if I can't have a dance where I'm fully expressed and not in any concern about the other person, but still in connection with them, then I don't actually feel safe in a space of me.
Yes. Just like me.
Yeah. So I think for a lot of people, like going through trauma, for example, coming into a space like contact improvisation and being like, what the heck am I expected to do here? Oh my God. No way.
Yeah.
And I wouldn't blame them one bit. If I come in and I see all dyads, mostly men and women, people identifying as men and women together, and it being all kind of the same, quality, and it has to be about the physics or it has to be about this. It's just, that is not an inclusive space.
Mm. And it's so interesting because oftentimes those regulations or kind of attachments to it has to be this particular way are with the goal of making it a more inclusive space.
Yeah, but it seems artificially imposed when it's done through restrictions like that, as opposed to trusting the wisdom of the individuals and of the participants. This is where I feel there's a whole other level of education and role modeling that's so important for us to receive / ask for / know we need / give to each other.
Yeah.
And this is the big ask. This is the brave space as far as I'm concerned, because it's such the uncharted map. And just like folks who have been struggling with trauma, who have had traumatic experiences, can get overly identified with that identity of being a traumatized person. And then it affects the way they move in space, be in space. Just like that person needs a different role modeling and skills so they can self-regulate, set a boundary, ask for what they need, all these things. And we don't need to give in a perfect world, don't over care for the trauma such that we keep the trauma locked in as an identity and then it isn't grown beyond. Another side of the same coin is, what are the skills that we can learn ourselves and role model and teach each other around arousal energy and escalation? Because similarly, people can get very identified with their big erotic energy, their big life force, and can impose a meaning on it. Like, wow, this person I just danced with inspired my big erotic energy, and therefore it means we're supposed to be in a relationship and do a thing and blah, blah, blah. And I'll tell on myself that the first time I ever did microfusion, which is partner dancing in a very close embrace and very intimate and sweet and nourishing. And I just love that kind of space. And I've become much more skillful in it now. The first 2 dances I ever had in the microfusion world, in the microfusion bubble of that embrace, after those 2 dances of that first dance that I went to, I was so offended. I was so offended after those dances. And I'll tell you why. And it's not why you think. Those dances were spectacular. The dancers were lovely, amazing, deep and rich and amazing. And neither of them asked me for my phone number after those deep, amazing dances. And I was offended. I was so offended. But I had to realize, like, oh, wait. That's not why we're here. That's not why we're here. And so I had to pull back my big erotic energy and remember, oh, okay, right. We shared a gorgeous dance. And that doesn't mean that we now need to know each other's names and exchange numbers and go on a date next week and do this every time this dance happens. And, it doesn't mean anything like that. So what I have learned and what I teach those in my realm are keeping our energy vertical. And this is a very tantric principle. We can stay centered in ourselves, keep our energies vertical, especially our big, beautiful erotic energies vertical, and not send it horizontal where it's moving in the direction of grasping and reaching and running an agenda and seeking an outcome. When we can just stay vertical, then that energy can move through us unimpeded. It can become creative energy. It can be that fluidly expressed. It can be that personal expression coming through. And it doesn't have to get tentacles and go out and find someone to cling on to and start to possess or make a story, a narrative about. So I'm glad I learned my insights early on inside of this very nurturing, intimate dance, because I would be disappointed and making up a lot of stories about people and offended a lot if I was expecting outcomes, certain outcomes, instead of just being in the beauty of that shared experience. So again, as learning how to navigate, how to harness, how to ride the lion of our erotic energy in such a way where that energy gets to be there, but it doesn't take over and create drama. Because we've all seen that happen in our various communities, dance and otherwise, where, big, beautiful, erotic energy got directed outward with a big agenda attached to it, understandably, naturally, except that it had a hectic impact to the people involved and then rippled out to the community. Whereas if there had been a bit more self-awareness, some skills around how to not escalate, how to not misperceive what that energy is or means, then that drama and that harm and that rupture, all the ruptures could have been avoided. So that's what I'm very interested in now and I stand for, teaching people about erotic energy, specifically dancers, about, we do the food handling safety practices to work at restaurants. So we need handling big erotic energies training for dancers as a similar safety protocol, so to speak.
It feels to me like the early stages of that learning must just be so painful. And I look in my own past too, and I see the ways it's been so painful at first until the space opens, until the understanding opens in me that actually I am loved, that actually I can be in this space without needing something that I think I need. And how could I be wronged by not being given it? I've definitely had that experience and seen that, and I've seen dancers go through it. And I almost want to warn people coming to these practices, for me, particularly contact, but hearing about microfusion, I'm like, oh yeah, that would get me. And it is a way where it's triggering. It's like pulling on the heartstrings towards this to educate us about this kind of sovereign beauty. But it's at the same time, there's part of me that still as a response and tightens a little of well, I don't always want to, sometime I want to be able to get someone's number after if it's really called. If that dance is really that beautiful, I'm not going to let them go without checking in, because that to me is God.
At least checking in.
Yeah.
Totally.
Are we
the difference
here?
Was I noticed mine was an expectation, and that's when we get into trouble, is when we're holding expectations. Yes. Expectation is very different than what I hear you speaking to, Matthew, which is invitation. You would have invited the exchange if it felt right and mutual, as opposed to expecting. And if you got to know, being offended and annoyed, and now you're holding a grudge, and now you're never dancing with that person again because what a jerk they are. These types of dramas.
I'm never gonna dance again. Dancing feet have got no rhythm.
Yeah, it's so great. It's what some of the communities are doing now around consent and normalizing the no, normalizing rejection, normalizing the feelings that come with being rejected and getting to actually feel those feelings, having someone in front of you during an exercise before before the event starts, crying because they just really aren't comfortable being rejected. And it just brings up all their stuff. And just having those spaces where we can really skill build, really infuse those communities, those spaces with a lot of skill building. I think that's the ultimate dominant leadership in community leadership, is to track, to attune to the submissive attendees, right? Attune to what they need and give them what they need. If they're showing you as a dominant leader in the community that they aren't capable of saying no, and they're getting further traumatized by doing things they don't want to be doing, it's great to infuse skill building in those areas, to speak in circles, to really bring it out, because that is the ultimate empowering dominant leadership in communities like these. And I love hearing about Zahava, let's divide groups out. Let's create a different kind of container over here and say, we're not going to do that here. Maybe we'll try that over here. I think it's fantastic to see some of these developments in leadership. Makes me really happy.
Yeah, and we need them. We need them because there's been so much pain, too much pain, just from natural the learning curve that we humans go through. And so for learning and transcending and learning more and transcending our mistake and creating something new, all the better. And so similarly, I'm a big advocate for the folks with the big erotic energy. Just like there's a lot of advocates for the folks with the traumas. I've had this idea that on the dance floor, how amazing would it be? Just like we have dance angels who are available if someone's having an emotional response or feeling unsafe. The dance angel is someone who that person can go seek support with on the dance floor. Well, I felt, wouldn't it be great to have something similar, except they're the like wise, meaning they've stepped a bunch and they've learned, and they have their dance skills and their autonomy, their sovereignty intact and self-awareness intact, and know how to do consent and redirection. So we kind of have a dance angel that's for when there is someone who's being clunky and clumsy with their erotic energy and they just don't know. They just don't know better because it hasn't been shown them. So maybe another dancer's having an issue with someone who's being a little clunky, confides in this other dance angel. That dance angel dances on over and has a dance with that clunky person and checks in and maybe starts to role model or redirect or in some way demonstrate through compassionate conversation. Like there's been some feedback that your energy and this and that you've been doing has been a little intrusive or invasive or this or that. If you're open to it, I'd love to share a dance with you and show you how to move or be with that energy in such a way that is more centered and less tentacle-y, and just does some kind of on-the-spot role modeling that calls that person in. Instead of what happens all too often is that person gets shunned, that person becomes a pariah, they're disinvited from that dance community, and then that one and the other ones that they've never even been to. It's just because they have a reputation and no one stepped in to do any sort of restorative justice, like help this person learn before there's more harm that was not intended. And communities, because we carry around a lot of taboo around our own sexuality and eroticism, there aren't so many people who are yet willing to step into that space and support the clunky erotic energy folks to become less clunky and actually become beautiful artists, energy artists on the dance floor.
Totally.
So that's the piece that I'm excited about.
De-shame. Yeah, de-shame and normalize the creep, because the creep is just desire that shoots out sideways and unconscious ways, suppressed ways. And it's, of course, who wouldn't be creepy in a world that suppresses sexuality so much as ours does? I mean, people in other countries come here and they're like, wow, you all are pretty repressed sexually.
Creepy.
So of course we're going to get creepy. There are going to be all kinds of creepy things. And so when we do, I love what you're saying, because it's like we do need to take it one step further beyond punitive culture that says we got to work with these, we got to get these creeps to be accountable and responsible. It's like, yeah, and how about engaging in dances? And I used to do this a lot and still do it in Boulder Contact Improvisation Lab, where the people who are kind of repeat creepy offenders, actually having dances with them, initiating dances with them and giving them feedback because they haven't been getting feedback from people who don't necessarily feel safe giving.
They're getting pushback, not
I notice you're using your hands a lot and you're kind of doing this motion. I don't even know how you're feeling right now. You might be feeling erotic. You might not. It might just be kind of your expression. But the way it lands for me is this. Oh, really? I didn't even, most people are like, oh, really? I didn't even know that. Can you tell me more? When we get real with our feedback in a loving way, that then there's a real conversation that can happen. And it reveals things for the other person they didn't even realize they were doing. So like the intent is usually not malicious, even for the creepy people. So I love talking about this piece. Yeah, really important.
Susan, there's a piece you just modeled there that's so key to somatic relating that I want to point out so that it doesn't just go assumed, because it's so simple, but it's so important and brilliant, which is, you said, here's what I notice you doing. And particularly, it was like in relationship to my body. And rather than saying, just here's how it's affecting me right away, here's what I notice you're doing. Here's how it lands in my body. I'm curious. what is your experience? It honors that so much of what we do, we may not even be conscious of. And then we may have very different perceptions about the meaning of what we're doing, because so much of what the body is unconscious. The body isn't the mind, which is observing it. So it's bringing that mindfulness to it and then communicating without a blameful story, just saying, hey, here's how it lands with me, and including, and maybe I don't like that, but I'm curious what your experience is. And that's such important modeling to me that you brought with that.
Yeah. There might be a moment with the person like that, if they keep doing it and they're not getting it, where we say as a leadership body, we're going to create a restriction. We're going to ask you to just dance with people socialized as men for a while, because you're creeping out a lot of the people socialized as women here. And a lot of them aren't, and they're not talking to us about it till years later. So, there is still accountability, right? We're not,
heck yeah.
There's no accountability. We just have to work with perpetrators, right? That is not what I'm saying at all.
Thank you.
And where is the safer space for someone who is bringing that kind of energy, for them to learn, Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you. Any last pieces around co-creation, last thoughts around this whole thing that you want to speak to before we sum up?
Well, I love that this entire conversation has been a co-creation, and it's been incredibly enjoyable to me to be here with both of you. And that co-creation is another, in my paradigm, is another word for relationship. And relationship is what's happening every moment of every day. Even if there's a designated lead and a designated follow, or a dominant and a submissive, it's still a co-creation. And there can still be fluidity between those seemingly opposite roles. And I feel that the more each of us sharpens our skills at conscious co-creation, then the more each of us will be able to show up as adults in love and relationship on the dance floor, as community members, family members, friends, partners, all of it. And that's really what the world would benefit from most now, is folks with skillfulness at relating, skillfulness at co-creating, unifying the different pieces, parts, and people.
I love that. I think what I want to bring is an invitation, if for those people listening, and also for me, myself, I always invite myself first, but what are the ways that I'm wearing a hat that it's somehow now fused to my head? What are the roles that we play that get ossified, that turn to stone in our existence? And how are we exhausted by that? How is that disempowering? And what might be really interesting in terms of exploring a new kind of identity, a new kind of even relating with the world with a totally different role? And I do believe that dominance, submission, power play, all of this stuff that's emerging is really helping a lot of people to experiment with our identities, with who we could be if we didn't have to be this thing that was projected on us from birth, or our, religion, or our intimate relationships, patriarchal society, whatever it is, So I feel like for me, it's a real, out of deep love and excitement and passion that I want to see people better. I want to experience people more deeply. And I feel like I can do that better if I don't leave people thinking they have to be a certain way with me. So yeah, for me, it's the invitation is, what roles do you want to play with? If you could just put down for a moment your need to initiate all the time, see what it's like to stop that. If you are someone who's always taking care of somebody else, see what it might be like to have an experience where you're not taking care of anyone, even if you're in a dominant role. I'm going to be in a dominant role and not take care of someone. So just some ideas there. And I'd be curious to hear from listeners. What are ways that this might be sparking you all to explore that? And thank you so much, Matthew and Claire. It's been wonderful being with you both. Yeah.
Such a delight for me too. And what I'm left with, I think, is something that's been with me for a while that's developing another stage, which is the question of how we co-create when we're at different levels of power, when we're not necessarily equals in a space. And certainly that's true as a facilitator, right? The role of power is different. Facilitator is in many ways a position of dominance. I've had people, when I've held the dances, I've had people speak to contact as being like a subspace, because I, kind of spell everybody into this way of relating, right? And so then it's a subspace there in this submissive place. And I'm really interested in that, in how when we're leading spaces, we have a different role of power. And yet I know I lead spaces because I love to be in these kinds of spaces. And so there's an inherent like peace there, and as I want to bring Brave Space to more and more people, I have this feeling that I want to help people hold spaces where we can all take this risk of being vulnerable, but we have to be aware in doing that there's power being exchanged. But I also believe it's very possible to be co-creative when that power is held consciously. And I feel like this conversation has supported that thesis, if you will, that if we're consciously exploring what our power is and how we're using it, and not just assuming that power always bends to every trauma, but rather calls out, hey, I think there's some trauma here, and maybe this isn't a match for this power. So, speaking to it consciously, hey, I invite you to take this risk, but let's speak to the fact that it's a risk. Then it becomes possible. Hey, here's the black rope. Here's the white rope. Beautiful, beautiful way to lay out a space. Hey, you can play with this energy in this space. In this space, we're not going to play with that energy. Like what that does is remarkable. It creates that both and, by which the dominance and submission join into the co-creation. And that's, that's what I take from all this. Beautiful. I want to give you each moment to speak to how people would find you. I want our people to find you. How do they find you?
Well, I'm easy to find on the web. I'm at clairerumore.com, and I'm also a senior faculty member at Shakti Shiva Academy, and they can be found at shaktishiva.academy. And so those are the two spots to locate me. Beautiful.
Thank you.
I'm Susan Coates, and you can find me at susancoatescoaching.com. You can schedule an exploratory call with me to explore something you want to talk about. I do sessions with individuals, couples, groups. And I also teach through the Somatica Institute in Berkeley, California. I teach worldwide programs there for people who want to become certified as sex and relationship coaches, or just more deeply explore the skills of life as a de-shamed sexual being. You can find me at the somaticinstitute.com.
Awesome. Thanks for listening to the Brave Space podcast. Before I let you go, I want to encourage you to go to bravespacesomatics.com, where you can join the email list, and I'll keep you informed about what's coming up. There will be workshops and retreats and opportunities available. At the end of 2024, there is a New Year's contact retreat coming up, and that's going to be in California. And then in late February, there is going to be a retreat with my friend James Kapika, and he brings yoga and Thai massage, and I'll be bringing dance and somatic approach to the body, to how we get off the mat, is how I like to think about it in relationship to yoga. And we'll do a little bit of contact there. It won't be as contact driven. Again, www.bravespacesomatic.com to join the email list.